Hi friends, I'm Father Kerry Walters, pastor of Holy Spirit American National Catholic Church, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one asking the question, who wants to be a saint? In his Christian classic, The Seven-Story Mountain, Thomas Merton, who by many people's estimations is one of the most insightful spiritual authors of the 20th century, tells this story. Merton converted to Catholicism when he was 23, almost 24 years old. It was in 1938. He shocked many of his Bohemian friends by his decision to do so. But one of them, the poet Robert Lax, seemed more sympathetic to the decision that Merton made than the rest of Merton's companions. As the two of them were strolling down a street in Greenwich Village, shortly after Merton had converted, Lax suddenly asked Merton, "Well, what do you want to be anyway, following your conversion?" Merton was taken aback by that question, and he muttered, "I guess I want to be a good Catholic." Whereupon Lax almost immediately said, "Wrong. That's not what you should try to be. That's not what you should want to be. You should want to be a saint." I think Robert Lax had it exactly right. Those of us who call ourselves Christians are called to become saints. We are called to enter into that great host of the beatific that surround God's throne. The problem, however, is that most of us think that we do have the juice to become saints, that we aren't holy enough or righteous enough to be graced with the title saint. This is a particularly pressing question because this week we celebrated the Solemnity of All Saints, a wonderful feast in the church calendar in which we express in explicit terms our communion with the saints that surround God, the saints that have gone before us, the saints that serve as exemplars and inspirations for the rest of us, the saints who are always present every time the Eucharist is celebrated throughout the world. So the question then becomes, I believe, well, what does it mean to be a saint? Is it really something that's beyond the reach of the quote-unquote ordinary person? The word saint is derived from the Latin word sanctus, which in turn is a translation of the Greek word agios. Sanctus means holy, and it in turn is derived from a Latin verb that means to be apart from. I think that these two words give us a really good starting point for navigating the meaning of sainthood. A saint is a holy person who is set apart from. But then the question is, well, set apart from what? The usual way of answering this question, the kind of conventional way of answering the question, is to assume that a saint is set apart from the hustle and bustle of the everyday physical world. A saint is an individual who secludes him or herself in a convent or a monastery, or perhaps in a hermitage in the wild. A saint is an individual who separates himself or herself in a physical way from the world in which the rest of us dwell. Well, I think some saints certainly do that, but most saints do not do that at all. They live in the midst of the hurly-burly world. They're not set apart from it. What then are they set apart from? Well, I would suggest to you that what a saint is set apart from is her own ego. Saints liberate themselves with the grace of God from the continuous me-centered universe that most of us live in. Saints have been, in one way or another, through discipline, through prayer, and again through divine grace, to distance themselves from all of those passions and desires that constantly drive us hither and yon. They are set aside from themselves, if you will, in order to make room for God. And in so doing, they conform their will to God's will, wherein lies genuine freedom. So a saint is a person who has liberated herself from the ego. As St. Paul would put it, it is no longer she who dwells within, it is now Christ who dwells within her. She is filled with the Christ Spirit. And what does that mean from a practical perspective? Well, I think at least it means this. The saint is enabled to see through Christ's eyes. And when she sees through Christ's eyes, what she observes are people, regardless of how ill or poor or degraded or despairing they might seem to be on the surface, are individuals who are made in the image of a loving God and who themselves are consequently lovable, worthy of our compassion and our respect. And the saint treats them accordingly. Like the God in whose image she and the rest of us are made, she bestows love in a profligate, indiscriminate fashion. She sees that the world is saturated with God and that there is nothing in it or nobody in it that is beyond the reach of God's love. And as an individual who carries within her the Spirit of Christ, what she tries to do is to share that Spirit with everyone else. So, for example, I think of St. Catherine Drexel, who gave up a lifestyle of privilege and wealth to dedicate herself to ministering to African Americans and Native Americans during a century in which they were horribly exploited and horribly oppressed. Or I think of St. Damien, who devoted himself to ministering to and nursing lepers in Hawaii, lepers who were considered to be fearsome outcasts of society. Or, of course, I think of St. Teresa of Calcutta, who spent her entire life ministering to the down and outs, not only in Calcutta, but across the world. St. Teresa wonderfully often said that they are Christ in distressing disguises. She was able to see the Christ within them because she looked through Christ's eyes. And she was able to look through Christ's eyes because she had set herself apart from her own ego, from her own passions and desires and aversions, and now was able to take that Christ-like view upon the world. So my friends, I'm not saying that becoming a saint is easy, but what I am saying is that becoming a saint is the ultimate destiny that each and every Christian ought to pursue, and that it is entirely doable. With God's grace, each and every one of us can become a saint. Each and every one of us can become one of those individuals who is filled with the Spirit of Christ and who, as a consequence, bestows love profitably, just as God does throughout creation. I'm Father Kerry Walters. This has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. And remember, your destiny is to become a saint.